Professional services clients have access to the full version of the relative rotation graphs, which allows you to script for certain conditions. Now, RRGs were developed by Julius de Kempenaer and is a great way to visualize relative strength of a portfolio or a universe of stocks relative to a benchmark. So there's lots of information on our website and on the internet as a whole, so search for relative rotation graphs to get a better understanding of the concept behind it. But in this example, I've got a watch list here, and I'm going to click the Open List As, and I'm going to select Open RRG. So this is what a relative rotation graph looks like. There's about 110 stocks in this, so it's a little bit messy, but basically there's a benchmark in the middle, and all the stocks tend to rotate around this benchmark in a clockwise direction, where leading is the top right quadrant, weakening bottom right, lagging bottom left, and improving top left. And so using the scripting language, we can script on any of the values used to calculate these arrows. So for example, I'm just going to mouse over that arrow there, and you'll see that the label pops up with all those values. So ratio and momentum is the X and Y axis of the RRG. And we've got angles, distance from the middle. I'll show you an example on how we can use that in a minute. And also the quadrant value and the heading, which is the direction of the arrows. So they're the popular ones on which we can script for. So let me make a column in this watch list. So new script column, and for RRGs, if we type RRG, it tells us RRG lines use JDK-RS. So that's the function that we need to use. So JDK-RS, and using the dot notation, these are the various outputs available. So in this example, I'm going to choose Quadrant, and by default, this is a list of US stocks. By default, it knows that they're from the US, so it's going to use the S&P 500 index as the benchmark index. If you open up a list of the FTSE 100, it will be the FTSE index. Australian stocks will be the XJO. But you can click inside the parentheses to bring up the properties, and the comparison index, if left blank, it will go to the default, but we could put in anything in there, another stock or another index that you want to use. So I'm just gonna leave it as the SPX. So when I hit apply, it's gonna fill in that column with whichever quadrant is applicable. So AAL is in the leading quadrant, so it'll be over here somewhere, whereas let's see, AKAM, that's an easy one to find, that's also in the leading. So if we go down here into the watch list, you can see it says leading quadrant. Now that's on a daily basis. We can change the RRG to weekly, so the longer time frame. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom out, and as you've probably seen in earlier videos, we can set the time frame of a script column. By default, it will be daily, but we can change the time frame to week, and that fills in the text, and we can apply that, and the column will be updated. So you can have a daily column, you can have a weekly column. You can put the values in of the ratio and the momentum, and you can also put in the distance. So basically the further away you are from the benchmark, which is 100, so that's in the middle. If we zoom in, this 100 ratio and 100 momentum, the closer you are to that, the closer you are to the benchmark. So to get more alpha, or to get more returns, you want to be further away from the benchmark. So that's why distance is important, and that's calculated using Pythagorean theorem and the formula for that, but we can use that in a column. So I'm going to right click, edit column. I'll keep it to weekly, but instead of quadrant, I'm going to do distance. Hang on. Oh, it's because I've changed the text. So instead of I can select distance from inside of there. So now I'm going to get a value in that column, and watch as columns can be grouped into a number of groups. So we can group by number, decile, quartile, etc. So I'm going to do decile. So there's about 100 stocks here, so the bottom 10 will appear at the top, and we can collapse that group. And I'm going to label this script so we know what it is. So distance. So if we right click in the grey header bar in the column that we want to summarize, go to summary type, and we can type average. So now when we collapse those groups, so the average closest is only 0.8, but the furthest away are in the 10th decile, an average of 20 away from the center. So we can expand that group. Let me close that RRG on the screen in a moment. So these are the ones that are furthest away on a weekly basis. So I can click on the open list and then open the RRG. Now this column is based on weekly. By default it will open up a daily RRG, but we can change that up the top there, and you can see that these are the 10 furthest away from the benchmark for that universe of stocks. Let's show you a couple of scans now. So search is scanning manager. So let's say we want a scan on a universe that show me where the quadrant changes, so the arrow or the stock moves into a quadrant. So again, JDK RS. Now the values for the quadrants, 0 is leading, 1 is weakening, 2 is lagging, and 3 is improving. So we can do dot quadrant, and the operator we can use is change to. So when it changes to 0, it means that the previous day it wasn't in 0 and today it is. So it's crossed over into that quadrant. So we can apply that. I'm going to scan on the S&P 500 stocks for yesterday. So when I execute scan, that's going to run through. There were 19 that moved into the leading quadrant. So I can export, open results as, open RRG, and I'll just drag that up into its own tab, and you can see that in fact that was the case. So this is I did this on daily values, so that each dot is 1 day. So these tails are 5 days long. So the previous dot, so yesterday it was outside of quadrant 0, which is leading, and today it's in. So we can see the path. We can drag the left hand side of the history slider, and as we drag it to the left, the tails get longer, so you can see the path that those stocks have taken. Or you can physically see the rotation. Put your cursor inside of that shaded area so that it turns into 4 bars, and as you 4 arrows, and as you drag left, each arrow is still 5 days in length, but you can see the rotation as it moves into that leading quadrant. One final scan I'll show you is the direction of the arrows. So if we mouse over, we get a label pops up, and you can see heading there. In this example for EQT, it's 101 degrees. So it's based on so 0 degrees is 12 o'clock, 90 degrees is 3 o'clock, 180 is 6 o'clock, and 270 is 9 o'clock. So if you visualize that on a clock face, you'll see that that's what the heading value represents. So if with a heading of 90 degrees means it's going exactly to the right at 3 o'clock. So we can scan on those values, because the direction of the arrow can give us clues about what may be about to happen. So searches, scanning manager. I can just edit this one. So dot heading. So I'm going to do crosses above 45 degrees. So 45 degrees is northeast. So it's a heading towards the top right corner, which is the leading quadrant. So type crosses above and then 45 degrees. Hit apply and then execute scan. Now I'm not specifying what quadrant these are in, so it could be in, I could add that. I could say and quadrant equals 1 or for example, but this will be in any quadrant. So I can now open results as RRG, and all these arrows you can see are heading in the top right corner, which is where we want it to go, towards the leading quadrant. So so now that if we save this, again I'm going to drag this up into its own tab. So we've got 2 RRG scans here. So this is the quadrant change. This one is the 45 degrees. So we can double click on the tab there, give it a name, 45 degree, 45. And now this is, we save this as a workbook. When we come back tomorrow and open this chart back up, it's linked to the scan. So it will, if we click on the properties there, it will say link to list, and the list to use is the scan. So it will rerun that 45 degree scan, and a new RRG will be created. Similarly with the quadrant change, the list will be updated based on the new data that came in at the end of the day. So it's not, you don't have to, it's like a watch list that updates automatically. The same happens with the RRG. So it's a dynamically linked to the scan. You don't have to manually run the scan again. It will automatically populate based on the new data.